My name is Kiana Douglas. We're here in Waterford, Michigan on the 14th of December 2017, and I'm the granddaughter of this veteran we're going to interview today. So can you start off by telling me your name and when and where you were born?
My name is Robert Frick, and I was born in Detroit, and my birthday is 10/9/24.
And who were your parents and what did they do?
I had a mother who was a school teacher at one time, and then spent most of her time raising our family. The rest of it, my father was a lawyer, immigration lawyer, and his name was Guy Frick.
And who were your siblings, and did any of them serve in the military?
I had a older sister and a younger sister and a brother. The brother came along later. And my brother got drafted and served, I think, 18 months or something in Germany. And he was interested in law, so he worked for the Army legal staff over in Germany. But that was the only other one in our family that did Army service.
Okay. And what was his name?
Guy.
Okay.
He was Guy Frick Jr.
Okay. And what were you doing before you entered the service?
When I graduated from high school, I enrolled in the University of Michigan, and I spent the first semester there, and then the second semester, and in the middle of the semester, I got a draft notice. And we went to see the draft board. I told them I wanted to be a pilot, and then I'd like to enlist in the Air Force. They said, we'll come back in July and June, and we'll sign you in. So that's what happened. I enlisted in the Air Force. I had to take a physical out at Selridge Field, and then I had to go to Fort Wayne to be indoctrinated, given the oath.
Why did they let you wait until June?
Till I finished the semester.
Okay.
So then they told me to come to Fort Wayne, put me on a train, and sent me to Great Lakes Training Center near Evanston, Illinois. And from there I was processed, I guess probably given clothing and all that kind of stuff. And then we got on a train and went to Miami Beach, Florida. And I spent, I guess, about 6 weeks in Miami Beach, Florida, learning to be a Army man. And it was basic training. You had to learn to march, you had to learn what you could do, you had to make a bed and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I learned all that. And then they decided I should go to cadet training. So they put me on another train and sent me to Superior, Wisconsin. And there was a bunch of cadets there already, and we signed in, and we were located right next to Superior Teachers College, and we stayed in their main office and their rooms. So it was nice place to be, and we enjoyed it. And as it turned out, for the people, there weren't many men in that area, so they had the ladies in that area put on a dance for the men, and I picked out a very good-looking woman, and through contact and letters and things overseas, I finally ended up in 48 marrying her. So that's how I found my wife.
Superior was a good place for them to send you.
Well, and it was winter. So then, just about the time winter was ending, we got through our Air Cadet graduation, so to speak, and we went out to Santa Ana, California. And that was a staging base for whether you wanted to be a pilot, or a navigator, or a bombardier. And I wanted to be a pilot. And we took all the tests for all three, and I passed the test for all three. But then they came along and said, we don't need pilots anymore. We need navigators. So they said, all you guys are navigators. We said, we don't want to go to navigation school. Yes, you do. Otherwise, it's gunnery school. So they shipped us off to Hondo, Texas, just south of San Antonio. And we went through our whole navigation training. And I don't know how long that lasted, I think. But I had to learn celestial navigation. I had to learn to read all the maps. I had to learn to use the drift meter. And we had, part of our training was flights that we could take in a smaller twin engine plane that would hold 3 students. So, and then we'd fill out logs and take the flights, try not to get lost. And we had an instructor up in the front, but he didn't much bother us. And that was part of our training. And so.
How did you like learning to be a navigator?
It was just something to do.
Okay.
It was just something to do. I didn't, I was interested in what I was doing, and I learned it pretty easily and did well in the school. And I didn't mind being a navigator. I wanted to be a pilot. But they said at that time they had pre-flight school for pilots that they would go to before they went to pilot training. Then they had to have a pre-flight school because they had too many people wanting to be pilots. So this ended my training. And I was fortunate. They asked me if I'd like to go to radar training, which was part of the navigation system. And I said, yes, that sounds interesting. I'd like to go to the radar training, which was a really new thing. It was super secret, and they actually investigated. The FBI went out to my house and my neighbors to find out if I would be safe. So anyway, I went to navigation school. They shipped us off to Florida again, and this time we went to Boca Raton, which is just south of West Palm Beach. And there we flew missions in a B-24 and checked out using radar for our location. And it was interesting. It was something new. And after, I think, 6 weeks, we were done with radar. Then the Boca Raton, we stayed in a Boca Raton club, which the government had taken over. And it was very fancy. They had 2 swimming pools, and well, I even borrowed some golf clubs and played golf. Played a couple of holes of golf because they had a golf course right there. So that was pretty interesting. And then we could take a car and go up to West Palm Beach evenings and meet some girls. And that was all very interesting too. So I enjoyed that part of the trip. Then when we were through there, we were assigned to Lincoln, Nebraska. And they gave us a 2-week leave to go home and then report to Lincoln, Nebraska. And we said, well, how do we get home? And they said, well, the trains are all full. We're not sure. Well, we went and 3 of us went and rented an old car and drove all the way to almost Chicago. And then the one guy lived near Chicago and I lived near Detroit, so I got on a bus and went to Detroit. The third guy, he took the car and went up to North Dakota. So that more or less ended all our training as a single person.
Okay, so through all the other moves besides that last one, how were you moving around the country, or how was the government moving you?
On a train. We went everywhere on a train, and one time we stopped in a swamp down in Louisiana, and we had all the windows open, and the mosquitoes were terrible. But it was a troop train, and we got fed. We got fed pretty well, and it wasn't bad. We well, we put up with it.
Okay, so after your leave time,
After my leave time, when I got to Lincoln, Nebraska, they said, "You're 2 days late," which really surprised me. I was AWOL. But anyway, they forgave me. And they took, it's where we met the rest of the crew. We were, that were going to be on the B-29s. The pilot and the co-pilot. The pilot was from Detroit area, actually went to Kalamazoo, lived in Kalamazoo. And we had a fellow from near Pittsburgh, and we had one out in, the bombardier was out in California, and the gunners were around different places. But we all got together, and then we all were shipped to Alamogordo for our B-29 training. And there we flew missions, practice missions, and one night we got lost, but it really wasn't my fault because it was supposed to be celestial navigation, and the dome that I'm supposed to look out froze over.
oh wow.
So I couldn't see anything. And then the radio wasn't working, and so I couldn't get a radio steer. And fortunately, the pilot had recognized a field this was night, recognized a field we flew over, and asked the field to blink their lights. Mm-hmm. And they blinked their lights, and we knew where we were. But we didn't want to go from where we were to Alamogordo because you'd have to cross a mountain range at night. So we landed in Arkansas and stayed all night. Next day we got up and flew back home. But that was one of our exciting missions. The only other one we had was we went on a bombing mission for the bombardier to practice, and we flew out over by a dam in Arizona. And when he went to drop the bombs practice, he had a policy of always hitting the salvo switch after the bombs dropped, in case there was one still stuck in the plane. Well, he hit the bomb switch, and unknowing to him, he salvoed the rear gas tank, which was unfortunate. But it was a big tank, but it was the one in the back bomb bay. We had 2 bomb bays. So that was the only other real exciting thing that happened in our training.
So what happened there?
Well, from there, they sent us up to Kearney, Nebraska to pick up a B-29. So we stayed 2 nights there, and our pilot went down and signed for a B-29. So he was responsible for a B-29. And he came back and says, I got a plane. So we were scheduled then to leave and go overseas. And in the meantime, my mother and dad had come to Kearney to see me. So they stayed 2 nights too, and I got to see them before I went overseas. And then from Kearney, the next day we flew from there to California and stayed another night in California while I checked everything out. And the next morning we got up and we headed for Hawaii. Well, you know, flying over land, you can use a map and usually know where you are. When you're over water, you don't know where you are. So I had to do dead reckoning all the way to Hawaii. And then when we got near Hawaii, they could turn on the radio and get navigation through the radio. So we got to Hawaii and safely, and it was my first experience flying over water and really having to navigate.
Wow.
And so we stayed there 2 nights. And then from there, we went on to Kwajalein, which is about another long ways out in the Pacific. And again, I found Kwajalein. And so they had more faith in me after that. And in Kwajalein was one of the islands that we had fought over. And it was interesting because that night in the ocean, or in the bay, we went down and went swimming, and we could see all the wrecks and everything under the water and stuff from when they had attacked the island.
Wow.
And then from Kwajalein, we flew to Tinian, and that was our final base. And when we got there, they had captured Tinian, but it was still kind of undeveloped, with the result that what we stayed in for several weeks was a so-called tent over a wood structure, which was okay, but it wasn't. But then they built Quonset huts, and they were like deluxe. I mean, they were just a lot different and a lot better than the first stuff we had.
So you were an officer at that time?
Yes.
So you stayed just...
I was an officer from the time I graduated from navigation school.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were in the officer housing.
Yeah.
That was nice.
Yeah, I was in officer housing. And our crew, the enlisted men, they were off somewhere else. I don't know where they were really, but they were off somewhere else because we weren't supposed to associate with them or anything, generally. So we finally moved into this Quonset hut, and from there, if there was a mission, we would go down to the briefing room, and they would go through what we had to do. And as a navigator, I had to know all the stuff about where they were going, what we were going to do, how we were going to get there, and and then they'd pick us up by trucks and take us out to the airfield, and we'd get in the plane and go.
So how many times did you go?
We had 30 missions over Japan or Okinawa or the places around there. And then after 30 missions, after our 30 missions, they dropped 2 atomic bombs and the war ended. But actually, the bomb dropping and they stopped the war, so they were no longer fighting. All they were doing was trying to get around to settling the thing. So we volunteered for a 31st mission, which was a mission to China to drop food for PWs that were located in China, that the Chinese had captured. And the result was that we didn't have to worry about getting shot at. That was a nice mission, safe mission. And after we finished that mission, they announced that everybody that had more than 30 missions would be sent home. So that's what our pilot had figured, and that's what worked. So then after Tinian, I came home.
So when you were on Tinian doing those 31 missions, were you always with the same people?
Yes, we had the same crew. When we went overseas and landed there, we were the first replacement crew that the 39th Squadron had. And they took the plane and wanted to break us up and put us on different planes. And our pilot said that we were a good crew, and he wanted to keep it together. So he agreed to fly as co-pilot, and we got an experienced pilot that had already flown some missions, who went home after we had 22. But that was, other than that, we flew all the missions. Now when we went down to the airfield, there was no problem with the enlisted men, with the officers, because that was our job. But the rest of the time on the island, I seldom ever saw them.
Okay. What was the name of your plane?
It was the Cultured Vulture. It was 35 Victor.
Okay.
That was our number. And on the tail, we had a big 39, and that was our squadron number.
Okay. So in those 31 missions, were there any like difficult times or missions that you remember particularly?
Well, yes. When we flew over Osaka to bomb it, it was rough. Now, when we first went over there, they were flying bombing missions at 30,000 feet, and they weren't hitting anything. What they found out was that there was a strong airstream up there, and they were almost going backwards. That's when they first discovered jet streams.
Wow.
The government never knew about them before, and they found out what a jet stream was. So they were flying those, and they weren't getting anywhere. And one of the generals in Washington said, "We got to do something." And that's when they brought in Curtis LeMay to run the Air Force, B-29s. And he decided that we could hit a lot more targets if we came down to a lower altitude. So we started running missions at 8,000 feet, which was just above the height that the automatic weapons in Japan could use. They could still use flak, but their automatic weapons, you'd see sometimes with tracers, you'd see them come up and curve off and go back down. But that was interesting. And Osaka, the second time we went back to Osaka, we were one of the tail end bunch to come in on the bombing run. They'd send a bunch of planes, and then they'd say, "You come over at 10 o'clock, you come over at 11 o'clock, you come over at 12. I mean, they spaced us enough so we didn't run into each other. But everything was burning.
Wow.
And we hit that heated area, and the plane jumped about 1,000 foot in a thermal. And then, of course, pretty soon we got out of the thermal and it started down. So it was like a roller coaster. And on one mission, after we dropped all the bombs and started home, one of the gunners in the back said, "Hey, I think there's still a bomb hanging up," which they did once in a while. So I mean, it was no big deal. We were at 8,000 feet. There's no worry about pressure. So I went out the hatch behind me, and the other gunnery guy came up from the other place. And we went out there and we held on, opened the bomb bays and kicked it loose. But that was not an unusual thing to have happen. It's the only time I did it. Another time, we were flying and we were attacked by Japanese fighters. And they were pretty mean. They'd come at you head on, trying to shoot up the plane. Because they couldn't chase us. I mean, we could fly almost faster than they could. But they'd come head on, and then at the last minute they'd dive down. And the bombardier really had trouble trying to hit them. But I sat a window next to me, one of the few people that had a window. I had a window I could look out. Well, I looked out, and here come a fighter straight at me. I could see the flashing of his guns. And I says, "Uh-oh." But he missed. But that was, at that time I knew we were really fighting. We weren't just dropping bombs. There was some danger to what we were doing.
Yeah.
But that's about all we did. We got our 30 missions. We had some bombing missions. We had some firebombing missions. We had a couple of missions where we went up and flew around above where they were bombing and dropped chaff to throw off the Japanese anti-aircraft guns.
And can you tell me about taking off and landing? Was that difficult?
No. Well, taking off was a thrill. Those planes, they'd get up to speed as fast as they could go and hope that they got airborne before the end of the runway. and there had been some that didn't make it. They just couldn't lift off, and then with a big bomb load, it was harder. Some of the bomb loads weren't so hit up, but the only thing is on liftoff, if you got the wheels off and before you got to the end of the runway, you're in good shape. But at one time they asked us to go. The officers had us go down and stand on the runway at 2/3 of the way down the runway. And they said if they haven't started to stop there, they're not gonna. So we were there, and what they would do is they'd send a plane like every 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. And we had to signal if the plane had his brakes on before he got to us. We had to signal that don't send the next one. Okay. If we if the plane went past us, it was gone. Wow. Whether it took off or landed in the ocean or what, but they sent planes pretty often. When we'd have missions where there'd be 300 planes. They weren't all from our group. Some came from Guam, some came from Saipan.
Okay. And how long were your missions that you flew?
Most of them were about 14 hours. 7 up to Japan and 7 back. Okay. And we had, some are a little shorter because we didn't go, we went maybe to Okinawa or someplace, and others were, and we had a couple of long ones. The longest one we had was when we dropped the food supplies in Japan, in China. Mm-hmm. That was long. We actually had to stay all night up at Iwo Jima and then leave the next morning, and then we had enough gas to get where we were going and get back to Iwo Jima. Okay. And that was a long mission. When we finished a mission, we had to go to a briefing and go over everything we saw and what we did and all this sort of stuff, and bring the people in the group up to date. But then I went back to the Quonset hut and I went to sleep. And I could sleep 8 hours right after I come back from a mission. One time they tried to wake me up. They wanted to see how well I slept, and I think they piled blankets on me and blankets on me and blankets on me and blankets on me, and I finally woke up. I was sweating. But those are things we did. Yeah. But it was so when we got our 31st mission in, then they said, okay, anyone with more than 30, go home. So they put me on a plane, ATC transport out of Guam. I had to fly. They flew me down to Guam, some other people, and we got on a B-24 that had been converted to a troop ship. Mm-hmm. So far. And we flew from Guam, we flew to Johnson Island, which was a place they landed, and then on to Hawaii. And then from Hawaii we flew back to California, and that ended our flying.
Well, when you were still on Tinian, do you remember when the war was close to coming to an end?
There was a group that came in there and settled down, 504th, and they settled down and they were fenced in, and they had guards, and you couldn't go in there at all. And we asked around, what are you guys going to do? They said, well, we're here to end the war. We said, yeah, sure. And then we found out that, then after, we didn't know what they were doing. We didn't know the atom bomb was there, which was on Tinian, and we didn't have any really knowledge. In fact, after they dropped the first atomic bomb, we didn't know it till the next day or something. Mm-hmm. And then they dropped the other one. But they were secretive. Okay. And of course, that was the reason. The minute they dropped that second bomb and Japan said, we give up, well, then it was safe to fly.
Yeah.
But
so how long did it take you to get home?
I think, that was all in August. And I think they shipped me home sometime in September.
Okay, so
Because-
what point did you got back to where in the United States?
Oh, they flew us back to California. Well, at that time, the airport was Fairfield Susan, but I think they changed it to Travis Base. But they flew us back there, and then we reported for duty and said, now we got to get home. And the guy said, well, we don't have enough room for passengers. And they said, if you want to go home tomorrow, we can get you on a train, but you're going to have to stand up till you get to Salt Lake.
Wow.
Because a bunch of them were going to Salt Lake. And we said, no, that doesn't sound very good. What else can you do? Well, they said, if you want to stay 3 nights here, we can put you on a train with a berth and everything, a regular Pullman, all the way to Chicago. So we stayed 3 days. And we had a very good time. And there were just 3 of us. And then when we went to Chicago, of course, we had to go up to the Great Lakes. And that's where they asked me if I wanted to sign up for the reserve. And I said, no. I just want my certificate of discharge. So I got my certificate of discharge. And then they sent me home. Well, I had to get to Chicago, and then I took the Chicago train into Detroit. And my folks met me when got there.
So was it exciting to come home, or what were people's reactions?
Well, my job was over. It was good to be home,
Yeah.
but I came home and most of my friends were in school at the time.
Okay.
So it wasn't until I got back in the second semester. I went back to Ann Arbor the second semester of that year, and got into my engineering college, and that's where I finished my education.
Okay. So what did you do after college?
After college, that was interesting. I had to go to summer school, so I went to summer school. And when I got out of summer school, they were having a steel strike. And every place I went to look for a job, they were laying off their engineers. So I just couldn't get a job. I couldn't get hired. Finally, my mother had a friend who owned a tool factory, and I tried that, and that didn't work. They got up too early and worked too late. And finally, I got a job selling gloves at Hudson's. And I did well. They wanted me to stay on, but my uncle knew a man who worked for Fisher Body and had a big job over at the Fisher plant, and he got me a job there, and I've been there ever since. I worked there. I worked at that plant 2 years and then switched to the general office. But I spent the rest of my 30 years in Fisher Body.
So did the military pay for your education or help you with school?
Yes, the Bill of Rights.
Mm-hmm. Or the GI Bill?
The GI Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used that for the rest of the time that I was there. Mm-hmm. And it really helped.
Yeah.
I think it was a great thing that they did.
Okay.
And then the only problem I really had was that because I was on Tinian, I had to pay income tax on all my service pay.
Oh.
Now, if I'd been down on Guam, which was one of our protectorates, they don't have to pay income tax. So I just was on the wrong place as far as the money went.
Wow.
But it was interesting because they were part of the protectorate. But that was the only thing I had some trouble with. I had to come up with the money.
Okay.
And,
well, did you ever achieve your pilot dream?
Yes. After I got out of the service and joined Fisher Body, I was at in their office. They started a flying club, and the guy talked me into joining it. and I got my pilot's license. So I spent several years with flying around. I finally had to quit, but that was one of my dreams. I did get to, and incidentally, when I was in Superior, Wisconsin for cadet training, they gave us 10 hours of flight training in a Piper Cub, but they wouldn't let us solo because they'd had too many crashes. I mean, all around the country they stopped the solo. So I got up to the point where I could have soloed, and then they stopped it. But so.
So have you maintained contact with other veterans over the years?
I maintained with some of the guys that were in our crew, and some of them had died, and some of them I just couldn't get a hold of. I didn't know where they went. But we decided, somebody called up one day later on and said, is Lieutenant Frick there? And I said, yes, speaking. Well, it was somebody in our crew, I forget who, that was organizing a get-together. And we had a get-together, I think it was in Kansas City. And then also there's our bomb group, the 6th Bomb Group, had a get-together every 2 years. And when they heard we were having this meeting, we had a lot more people than just the pilots from our plane. They enjoyed that. And then they had this bomb group meeting. The 6th Bomb Group would meet every 2 years. But then we got so old we decided to change it to every 1 year because otherwise we were missing some of the people. But over the years I've been going to many of our bomb groups get together. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's great. So as we're finishing up, do you have any final reflections on how your time in the military or during the war influenced the rest of your life or influenced the way you think?
Well, yes. I make my bed every day. And, and my navigation has helped, except I had some, I don't know what it is, but I can always know where I am. I mean, I can drive a car and never know, get lost. I just always am conscious of where I am. And I learned the stars and other things, and it was interesting. I learned, I have never used radar anymore, but because now they got Loran. We had some Loran toward the end of the war, which is a much better navigation system. They use it quite a bit now. All the air transports and everything use it.
Okay.
And it was something they put in. And that was part of getting Ewo, was that they had to put a station on Ewo. And they needed the island. But other than that, no, I just went, when I came home, I just went back to the same old thing, and that was about it. The best thing was, because I met my wife in Superior, and we got married after the war. And that was probably the best thing that happened.
Yeah. How was it maintaining contact with her during the war?
We wrote letters back and forth. Lots of them. I had 2 or 3 other people that would write me letters, and of course my family wrote me letters. And so, I got a reasonable amount of contact. And then another thing that when I was training down in Hondo, Texas, one of my uncles, I guess, or whatever he was. Anyway, we went out to his house for dinner, and he said he had an old radio if I wanted it. And it was one of these, about this size, an old-fashioned radio with a turntable on top, and you open the top and put in the records. Well, we didn't have any records, but I took the darn thing, and I took it back, and the rest of the time in the service, I always had a radio. And when I went overseas, I put it in my footlocker, and when we got overseas, we hung it in the Quonset hut up on the platform. So everybody in the Quonset hut where we lived had available radio. We used to listen to Armed Forces radio. We used to listen to Tokyo Rose saying, "Hey, 6th Bomb Group, we know you're coming," and things like that. And then there would be ball games and other stuff. So it was great having the radio because we had some kind of contact with the outside. And then finally, when I left, I just left the radio. So I don't know whatever happened to it or what they ever did with it. But it was a godsend.
Yeah, sounds fun. Well, is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or that we should add to this interview?
Well, there were a lot of strange happenings, I guess, but I think the interesting part was finding my wife. We were in up at Superior, Air Cadets. When we came in, the girls were all enthralled because all of the men were gone, so except the 4Fs. So the girls decided to have a dance for the cadets. So they had to dance in the gymnasium that was right next to our barracks, and they did a mixer. I don't know if you know what a mixer is, but it's where they played the music and the girls walk one way around the circle and the boys walk the other. And then when the music stops, you grab your partner. Well, when the music stopped, I grabbed her away from the guy in front of me. I kind of pushed him and grabbed her, and that's how we met.
Wow.
And that's about all I can remember. I had no problem. I didn't know about people getting hurt. The people the soldiers that went into Iwo Jima, a lot of them died. And it was mainly for our benefit, because if we got in trouble over Japan, we could always get back to Iwo Jima, because it was halfway back. If we were running low on gas, if we got shot up or anything like that. And that saved a lot of B-29 pilots. But we were lucky. One time we landed there, we had an engine that got some flack, and they wanted to make sure we could still go back to Tinian. But other than that, the war didn't have a lot of impact on me, except for travel. I saw a lot of places.
Yeah.
I still do travel.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Grandpa. We're all thankful for your service.
Well, I hope anybody that sees this enjoys it.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. Okay.